Let's move on to the next one then, which is kind of data. And this was Yusuf's question, but he's not even here. What's he like? So he wanted to know, how do we ensure that students get the practice with data that they need, and where do we get the data from? And I know that he was particularly interested in whether in how we use data kind of in context, so not just like here's a table, but you know, the kind of data and case studies are meshed together, and where we get those from and how we use those, because it's incredibly time consuming to get the right sort of data that's fairly up to date and is in easy enough to read form for our students. Often these reports are massive. I sometimes use the introductions, but even some of the language there can be a little bit difficult in the exec summaries. I like the Economics Observatory data stories. They're really good because they're a little bit more accessible, but they're still quite chunky. Does anyone have any good sources of data that they use, or things that you use for case studies? How do you ensure that students get the kind of exposure to the data that they need, so that they're ready for the exams and also just the wider world?
Have you fed back to the Economics Observatory? I mean,
we spoke to Richard Davies in December, I think. Yes, we spoke. Yeah, we spoke to Richard Davies in December, and I think those data stories are the closest thing that we've kind of, that I have found that we get to those elements, to the kind of, you know, this is what the data is, this is what it's showing, this is what it's not showing, and kind of talking you through. I find that it's the closest to what I would actually say if I had the kind of graphs on the screen, if that makes sense. Right. Any thoughts from anyone else? I can't see hands up at the minute because my screen isn't quite big enough. Gavin says the Economic Observatory has been great. Any other ways that you get data, or do you not practice it? Do you just not practice using the data, or do you use it just in case, you know, in exam, in practice exams? How are you making sure that students get that kind of exposure? Because in the exam you get data. Go on. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I am more the latter, that I don't necessarily make a big feature. There's plenty of data in all the sort of materials that I use, and the teaching of things. Which will get used in various ways, but I think this is almost exactly the previous point as well, that realistically, really, the actual sort of math skills or whatever, or using data that they have to do for the exams, at least, we might have wider and bigger goals about what we want to do, but for the exams, they're not all that. They should have that from GCSE, and maybe that's one of the things from the second thing, that they, you know, look at a thing and calculate some percentages or whatever. Fine, job done. I find the issue they have is sometimes just, I don't know, it's other aspects of comprehension of that particular data. They look at a piece of data and they just don't quite get what they're seeing, and I think that's often quite idiosyncratic to that data. Like it's in a particularly complicated way, or the title isn't that clear, it's not entirely obvious what they're looking at, and that sort of wider exposure to economic terminology and economic knowledge and that sort of side of things. So I'm almost skeptical that practicing the data is a thing. That makes sense.
I was just talking about this just this afternoon with someone who teaches at university level with maths. It was actually a business paper that I'd been doing, a past paper, and it was really simple data. There was bar charts, and they had to calculate a percentage of something from these bar charts. And I mean, half the class got it wrong. And I was like, I'm sure they learned that at primary school. They couldn't apply it at all. So I was talking about this, and he said, well, it's the same at university. He's teaching engineering. This kind of, I'm sure we've all talked about it lots before, that they don't seem to make the link with what they've learned in maths.
I think what I find is that
business and economics papers,
I'm less worried about the kind of calculation questions, because I think either they get them and it boosts the mark, or they don't get them. It's not. What worries me more is when they kind of aren't. It's kind of what you said about like literacy, in that they see a graph and they don't understand what it doesn't show. And if you don't understand what it doesn't show, then you can't really evaluate it very well. So they take it and they run with it, but then they don't really realize that that's not necessarily completely what it's saying. And being able to be really, really specific about what it does show, but what it can't show, you know, what isn't within its scope. I think that's quite a tricky skill, but I'm not quite sure how we get any further with that. I know the core maths, so core maths is the level 3 qualification. It's like an AS, and they do a lot of that kind of thing. What does this show? What doesn't it show? But I don't know if that's quite complex. I think, as Andrew mentioned, it links very heavily to the actual scenarios. It's quite context specific. But then there are things that students always do, and the students can't read very well, like index numbers and percentage, and if it's a graph of change, so a graph of the change in growth rate, or so a graph of the growth rate, and they see it kind of going down, and they can't work out that actually a falling growth rate is still growth. So Gavin says, under Blair's government, they started sending out little booklets related to the budget and comprehensive spending reviews, and you like them. You used to give them out to kids and have a chat about them. You'd love to see those again, so a bit more kind of access there potentially. I
suppose to pick up on what Gavin said there, to backtrack on what I said, I mean, after we've studied most of like first year macro, I do give them in a booklet a whole bunch of all sorts of data, and we talk about it, we go through it, we look at, this is like the state of affairs over the last 10, 15, 20 years of all these different aspects, and there's 20, 25 different graphs in that. And then the same sort of thing crops up again in something like my inequality materials in the second year have loads of data in them, and there's tons of stuff to just sort of work through. But again, specifically practicing the data for the purposes of the exam, I don't really do much, but use those sort of things that Gavin's talked about.
Do students like the data side of things? I mean, obviously, a lot of university economics focuses on data. I mean, and being an economist is really about making sense of data. So
and that's sort of one of the things that I suppose is never really been part of the real using of data. Now, the actual sort of like statistical analysis and stuff is not actually really part of the A-level. We don't get to sort of practice that. Using a data set is not something we need to do.
No, but it's sort of finding stories in data. So looking at a chart, sort of, being able to interpret, but also thinking about what that tells you about what's going on in the economy, or what, how people behave, or, I mean, that sort of seems to me, again, a skill that economists have, or the way, the economics lens is very much about looking at data and trying to use data to figure out what's going on. So I just wondered if students engage with data, whether they enjoy that, or whether they find it a bit of a pain.
I would say that the problem is that when we do engage with data in the exams, it's very superficial, kind of,
right,
as you've alluded to. I find that when you do look into the data, they are interested in it. I think sometimes it can be quite difficult to get through it. But what you said about the stories in the data, it's finding those interesting things. But often that means you need to have more than one piece of data at a time. For us, that's a problem with having to redo that every single year and keep it up to date. I also think I use quite a lot of the infographics type things. I think they come up all the time. I often start a lesson with either something from Visual Capitalist, which has kind of really interesting data, but it's just, I feel like I'm kind of downplaying students a bit in that it just looks pretty, and so it looks exciting, whereas a lot of the graphs that otherwise we might show you don't look particularly exciting at all. And I think then kind of that data visualization, you can really get excited about it. Look, what's this changing, what's this going to change? I also like the ones from the Economist Daily Charts. I use those quite a lot, but I think often it's about the data that you are showing them. Some data is just boring. It's finding the interesting data, realizing that, God, this is the difference between the top paid person and the bottom paid person. Isn't that insane? Or isn't it crazy how this, would you have expected the number of people working from home to have changed that much? It's finding those things. Rachel Griffiths did a nice little video showing data related to the sugar tax and how the young were more impacted than the old. And again, a short video like that could be used effectively to discuss elasticity and effectiveness of government intervention. Yeah, I think that was her RES past president's lecture, maybe, and you can download the slides for that as well, which is really nice. But it's those kind of things which are helpful, that you can kind of just use wholesale without having to go and find all the information when you don't have the time. And
I think this idea, this short videos thing, I know, Rachel sort of said, I think people at IFS would be happy to make those kind of videos, and people at the Economics Observatory, I'm sure, would be happy to sort of think about infographics. I think what perhaps one thing we need to do is sort of almost knowing what you need, because we don't know the details of the A-level curriculum, but and if you sort of say, well, these are the topics that are really helpful, and then we can sort of see whether people can sort of make that material. I mean, I think there's quite a lot of people that are quite keen to try and make economics more accessible and produce material that is useful to teachers and students, if we know what it is that you want. Because sometimes our idea of what's fun and useful is just way off. So you need to kind of say what you want. I mean, I'm not going to promise, but I think that's something that would be quite useful to know. What is it that be useful to you that would help bring economics to life to your students?
The one that
Sarah,
Yes.
No, go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to say, and I know that this is one of Will's favourite topics as well, is that I find development quite data heavy, and it's finding the information at the right time on on those sorts of things. Because what makes development exciting is looking at all these different countries and how they differ. But often that needs a lot of data, and I find that quite intensive to try and find the right data for those subjects for the kind of development and inequality predominantly, and maybe a bit on kind of the global trade as well, and perhaps poverty and labour markets as well. They're the kind of big ones that it is a pain to have to find the data for. I mean, I love looking for it, but it takes so long. Sorry, Will, go on.
Yeah, so I was just going to ask about the doing economics at core. I had a read through that, and I feel it's kind of just pitched a little bit above the A level. Yeah. If we could have the equivalent of that for A level, that would be great. For those that don't know, it's I don't know how you'd explain it, Sarah. It's like you get given, don't you, a data set? Is that kind of right?
Yeah, the doing economics. Yeah, so it's kind of data, and then sort of you can analyze it in Excel or R, and then it's sort of illustrating. You're doing economics, so you're analyzing the data and using that to kind of develop your economic understanding. I mean, core also has a lot of videos, so maybe there's just a mapping exercise that involved. I mean, again, a lot of the core curriculum material might be too advanced, but there are loads of really videos with economists kind of talking about a lot of these issues. So it's sort of really sort of trying to find what's out there and kind of so that you're not all reinventing the wheel. Yeah, no, but yeah, I mean maybe that, I mean, this is presumably something for the exam boards to kind of think about.
I think as well, you mentioned that OCR were keen to grow their offering. I think that might be because OCR is very, very much smaller than the other two exam boards.
Yeah.
Edexcel and AQA take the vast majority of students, and then OCR doesn't have as many, and then that creates a cycle, because then people don't make resources for OCR, which means that fewer schools are willing to pick it and that kind of thing. But it did used to be much bigger than it is now, so that that might come back. But
we didn't choose them, they chose us. I mean,
absolutely.
And if they're kind of I mean, we're going to work with them if they want to put their resources in, and it could be a way of seeing what's possible, really.
Absolutely. Is there anything else there before we just do quick AOB? Is there anything else on any of the topics that we've discussed tonight? Any questions, queries?
Sarah, I was just wondering, could we bring this all together in terms of a project whereby students are giving a data set on something that is a societal issue that shows how economics can take on some of the bigger problems and addresses diversity all in one? And I don't the thing that comes to my head is something like racial economic inequality or gender economic inequality, or something along the lines of that, whereby we can just bring this all together and just look at the data side, but also look at sort of how we can make it more inclusive as a subject, and it's empowering young people to use the data to find kind of solutions to what we could adopt as a country, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that sounds a good way forward. Yeah, so that's the sort of resources that will be useful. Is that's kind of
sorry, yes.
That's really helpful.
And to make it like a competition or a project, nationally, whereby students use the resources and come up with solutions and you
that would be great. So we're hoping so we'd like to do another round. So we had some students submit some videos, and we use that to select the winners for this for YES this year, but we'd like to do it again next year. So maybe we should make the challenge a data driven one.
What I'm hearing from Will is like a target 2.0, but not monetary policy.
Exactly. Yeah,
that would
I
be
don't
awesome.
know what target 2.0.
That was run by the Bank of England, and teams of 4 students would present for like 15 minutes on what should we do with monetary policy, and it all died a death a little bit, but not least because the Times like withdrew their funding, and also because nothing changes in monetary policy these days. So if there was a big sort of regional competition with loads of sort of teams presenting their big views on how to change something important, that would be awesome.
I agree. Target 2.0 would be a really good template, because teachers are mourning the death of it, and it died like 5 years ago.
Something like that, yeah.
Like that's really helpful. I look at that, and as I said, we've got some good organisations to work with. So with the YES competition, Health Foundation and McKinsey's, who are kind of working with us. So, I think, that they're both quite good organizations, hopefully, to work with the students. So, I'll take that away and sort of see what they'd like to do as well. And, hopefully they'll have lots of real world kind of problems and examples and data to kind of make use of. That's a great idea. I'm a big fan of data, so I think that would be really good to go with.